All righty. Had I known what we would see there, I'm not sure I would have volunteered to be next in the agenda. And hate to feel like I'm the one who has to bring you back to Earth, quote unquote. But thank you. That was fun and interesting. We're going to move on to our next section. We're going to bring some of the senior engineering and research and development leadership for all of Google, not just the enterprise parts, people that lead all the technical development and engineering research efforts at the company. Obviously, well-known figures inside Google and ones who have had enormous impact across the industry. So let me introduce now Vint Cerf. Oh, let me do it in order since they are in order. Here comes Vint Cerf, our Chief Internet Evangelist. Jeffrey Huber, SVP of Engineering. And Alan Eustace, our SVP of Engineering and Research at Google. Welcome. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I have a few questions, but I want to encourage you, starting now-ish, because I'll be happy to intersperse questions from the audience. So ask you to queue up. And the one thing I'll add to the Q&A session prior is I would ask that you say your name and what company you're from when you ask a question, just in the interest of transparency and such. So feel free. But anyway, thanks, gentlemen. Great to have you here. A great audience of CIOs and IT professionals and lots of others. So I'm going to just open up with a few questions, some of which I know some of the answers to. But I'll start with Alan. I joined the company just over 6 years ago. It was a much smaller company then. Alan joined the company far before then. So he has seen fairly enormous growth here. But one thing I just want to ask Alan is, what are some of the accomplishments that you've seen at Google in your time here that you are most proud of if you look back and reflect?
These are the questions. Well, first, I'm Alan Eustace, and I work for Google. Just there's just a lot of things that I'm very proud of. I feel like the search, and especially universal search, bringing together images and images, web, huge web, billions and billions of pages, video, news, all these kinds of things. I think doing that in one place, in one property, has been very important to me, and also getting the search, comprehensiveness, and also recency. I mean, things that happened only a minute ago, you can find now. So that's big. And that's been big. Our advertising and our publishers, the partnerships that we have with advertisers right now, is huge. I mean, we're supporting, I think, an entire web ecosystem. I'm very proud of that. Data centers, when I see an aerial picture of what our data center looks like right now, and the networks that went into it, the technology that went into it, I'm very proud of those. But there's also other things, small properties, things like speech recognition and translation have been huge, and I think are going to make a worldwide impact. And of course, applications, which is an area he made me put that in to the list. No, I really
best for last.
I really feel like right now we're at a stage now where I think we can lower the barrier of entry to corporations and stuff. We can change the economics. We can apply a lot of the research and development efforts that we've had on a much larger scale. And I think we can change the economics of the industry. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Great stuff. Maybe I'll just do one question of each, and then we'll go to the audience. Vint's obviously been involved in the development of the internet for a long time and has done a lot of work with the U.S. government over the years. One of the notions that this group here hears about a lot, and I just wanted interested in your perspective, is the notion of a private cloud. And what's the public cloud? What's the private cloud? Is this a semantic debate, or is there some substance to it?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that coming on after that performance from The Onion is tough. I think that it is not a semantic difference. Private clouds are just as reasonable as private internets, networks that use the technology of internet but don't go outside and interconnect with the rest of the world. So companies that make clouds for other companies, I think of IBM, for example, are making things that are tools for those companies to use. The clouds that we make here are tools for people to use. They're much more broadly accessible because of the fact that they're reachable through the public internet. So I don't see those as in conflict with each other. In fact, one of the things that you didn't ask, but I'm going to answer anyway, like every good graduate student does, you adapt the question until you can answer it, is that Inter-cloud interaction is something that is still very much in a formative stage. If anyone is thinking about how do I get my data out after I put it in, how do I move it from one cloud to another, there is no vocabulary right now for cloud A to say, please move this data to cloud B. It's like we were in 1973 with the internet. There were networks, they were proprietary. The SNA network didn't interact in any convenient way with DECnet or with Hewlett-Packard's network. The internet came along and said, we can make a non-proprietary way of allowing all these nets to interact. I think we're at the same point in 2010 where we were in 1973 when it comes to inter-cloud interactions. And just to add one more point, imagine that you have data in cloud A and it's protected. It's access controlled. You've gone to a lot of trouble to do that. The question then is, if I do want to move the data to cloud B, how do I move the metadata along with it so it's correctly understood and interpreted as equivalent access control? So there are a number of different organizations pursuing questions about inter-cloud interaction. It's a very rich area for exploration, and I don't think there are a whole lot of solid answers yet.
Great, thanks, Vin. A question for Jeff, and just by way of context, Jeff has been responsible for quite some time for the engineering work around Google Apps, as well as Google's ad systems and numerous other types of systems within Google. But I want to ask Jeff, I mean, Google's known for, launch quickly, iterate often, that type of approach towards making innovation happen and happen very quickly. What has Google had to do to reconcile that with the needs of a large enterprise, which obviously needs something that's more predictable, where it has more of a tried into a more diverse user base, perhaps, that it has to be concerned about?
Sure. So we've done our best to combine the best of both. We do have the foundation of starting with very large-scale consumer services where we've already made the capital investment. We have a great user experience. There's consumer understanding of what those products are, how they work. There's a lot of pull in the organization. You heard that some in the CIO panel, where a lot of the users already are enthusiasts. Active users already know how to use these products. So both the adoption and training and a lot of the things are much less of an issue. That said, there are very notable differences between the two use cases. So we've done a lot of work on just prioritizing the feature work of what are the kind of capabilities you need in the enterprise. Some of the very tactical things like delegation of accounts and calendar being able to support resources, things like that. That said, when we get into those requirements, we often see that those are very common with enthusiast or power user consumer cases. So we do think that the model of having a single platform driving that continues to make a lot of sense. We've accelerated some of our investments around reliability and security, which are topics that are very near and dear to the enterprise heart. But again, we see parallels of that into the consumer world, where the kind of things that we've done around Gmail with default HTTPS for wireless users has been a big boon of having login, history information, and location available and accessible there. Important for the enterprise, but important for consumer users as well. And then another area for the enterprise that's been particularly important is being able to scalably support an organization. So building out the APIs that you need to be able to transition and manage very large user bases, having the ability to provision 20,000 accounts or 30,000 accounts when you're doing the weekend migration from one place to another. And then all of the interoperation that you need with the existing infrastructure you have, being able to sync to different devices, being able to migrate from one platform to another, are some of the incremental things that we've had to prioritize. But that foundation of having products at scale that have a great user experience, where there's consumer understanding and consumer demand, we continue to be very excited about.
All righty. Thanks, Jeff. Let's go to the first question from the audience.
Hi, gentlemen. This is Doug Ross, Western and Southern Financial Group. Question really for all of you. We've seen some changes with respect to network neutrality with some decisions over the last couple of weeks. And Dr. Cerf, I know you've been heavily involved with network neutrality. I'm interested in what's your take on the FCC and network neutrality in general, and your relationships with the various carriers. Thank you.
So first of all, let me take the last part first. In a sense, we are very dependent on carriers all around the world because that's how users get to our products and services. So maintaining a working relationship with them is important to us. With regard to net neutrality, the term itself has been vastly distorted by the various debates and the biases that people have regarding oversight of network operation. The point that I'd like to emphasize is that our concern has been couched in terms of anti-competitive behavior. The possibility that an entity that controls broadband access to the internet in general might also interfere in some fashion with the choice of users to get access to any service and any product and any application anywhere in the internet in the interests of the company that's controlling that broadband access. And so our biggest concern is not that all packets are treated identically. We know that doesn't make sense. It's not that you shouldn't have to pay more if you consume more resources. That's not net neutrality. Net neutrality has to do with assuring that there's a level playing field so that companies like Google and Yahoo and others that provide services to consumers will have equal opportunity for the consumers to reach their products. There's a built-in inherent potential what I would say conflict of interest. If you're in the business of delivering video for a fee, but you are also supplying broadband access to the internet, it's conceivable that you would want to limit the competitors from delivering their video in an equally facilitated way. I'm not saying anybody is doing that, but the concern is there because there isn't a great deal of choice for users to pick among the various broadband providers. With regard to the most recent decision, I'm just an engineer and not an attorney, but the way I've interpreted this is that the court said that the Title I place where internet is now located for, let me call it regulatory purposes, didn't give the FCC, in the court's view, adequate leverage to cite Comcast for its interference with, in particular, in BitTorrent traffic. I think that the side effect of that may be to drive the FCC towards relabeling internet service into, for example, Title II, which is communication services. As an engineer, I have felt very strongly that the internet does have a layered structure. It does have a communications component. That communications component should be equally accessible to everyone. And in the past, when communications and internet services were in Title II, the common carriage rules applied. And when you offered access to communication services, you had to do so on an equal basis to everyone, equal terms and conditions. So I think that a return to that should not be accompanied, however, with a return to all of the strictures and regulatory structures of Title II. The telephony-related things don't necessarily have to apply. So the trick for the FCC will be to figure out whether it can make such a move and do so in a way that limits the range of regulatory oversight that it chooses to exercise over a reclassified internet.
Thanks, Vint. Next question.
Andrew Stanley from MWV. Vint specifically, and then to the whole panel. What do you see as the greatest challenge from a protocol perspective? So much of what you guys do are based off the protocols that came about in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah.
Where do you see your next focus being, specifically to Vint? And then to the panel, how is Google going to continue to be the thought leader that gives us access to these great technologies in a way that enterprises can easily consume them?
So my part of the answer is that scaling, of course, is still a major issue. IPv6 is utterly critical, and I'm so proud of Google for having implemented IPv6 in a timely way ahead of many others. We're going to run out of the v4 address space in the middle of 2011 or sooner. There are very few /8 blocks that are left, and I think that's a really important message for each one of you who cares to make sure that your participation in an expanding internet will continue. You need to implement v6 in parallel with v4, and you need to ask your ISPs to do that. On a more general basis, I see some huge opportunities for internet to expand into wireless modes of operation, satellite-based operation, which up till now it has not exploited. When you transmit over the radio, you have the possibility of delivering the same thing to multiple parties. The internet protocols don't take advantage of that. They take broadcast media and turn them into point-to-point links. And in some sense, that is a pity, because there are some very useful things you could imagine doing with a satellite raining internet packets down on 100 million receivers for people who are interested in receiving something in common, like a new update of software. So I think scaling and the ability to make better use of radio-based resources are major areas for development. And the higher level applications, though, identity, authentication, the ability to know with whom you're transacting, is another place where I anticipate a great deal of important work.
We also have a big group working on HTML5. We think that's a place where the standards are really going to make a big difference, because you're all aware of internet delivered applications, and how important it is to make that experience as fast and as interactive as you might see in other kinds of mediums like direct applications. And that's an area where we're spending a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of engineering resources.
I'm going to just interject a question since you brought up HTML5. One of the interesting things that's happening, I'd love to hear any of your perspectives on, is in the mobile world, in a certain way, though HTML5 obviously is important and most of the mobile platform providers are talking about it, there's also a reemergence in certain ways of traditionally installed applications. And in some sense, this feels like we're taking a step back, but would appreciate your perspectives on the browser as the platform versus native applications and where all that might go.
Start.
So, my view is that, there's always been this application versus the web, that goes back, for, as long as I've been in the industry practically. And there's always a gap, right, between what an individual native application can do, given all the resources it has, and what the web-delivered application can do. I think the real interesting thing now is that application delivered, or applications that are delivered as applications are now accessing the internet. So there's a blending going on where it's not just a standalone application anymore. They're using internet as a tool to deliver data. And the same thing on the internet, you get this fantastic ability to basically run across browsers and things like that. You can deliver any application that you want. You don't have to build one for this client, and this client, and this client, and this client, and this client. So there's a big opportunity between those two. But right now, I think it's fair to say there's still a gap between what you can deliver in an application in terms of interactivity and other kinds of things versus what HTML5 can do right now. And obviously, you get lots of interoperability and things like that. So the real key is how to close that gap. And by the way, that gap used to be like this. It's gotten like this. Now that applications are accessing the internet, it's like this. But there's no, there's no reason that an internet delivered application cannot be as rich and as graphical and as interactive and all that as one that you actually shrink wrap and have to go across 5 things. But I think it's fair to say right now there's a gap, and we have to address that gap, which is why HTML5 is so important to us.
Yeah, and just echoing some of the comments of this morning, I think it was Jeffrey Moore that mentioned that there is going to be a proliferation of different devices, and the app model doesn't scale well across different devices. The HTML5, the web model, does very well. So as a developer, as we push and as the HTML5 evolves and becomes more and more rich, so that gap between what you can do in an HTML5 app and a, quote, native app becomes smaller, then you have the choice of, do you want to develop once and get a lot of benefit, or do you want to have to develop uniquely an app for each and every platform?
So one thing that we're also doing is there's a group that's working on something called Native Client. And Native Client basically is a way to take code, put it into a sandbox, actually instrument to make sure it can't get to any of the other things, so protect it, but run at native speeds. And so that's an example of, once that technology works well and everybody adopts it, that will raise the bar on what a web-delivered application can do. So it's pretty exciting.
So I wonder if I could add a couple of thoughts. First of all, this Internet of Things is a term that's popped up now and then, and I'm a big fan of putting more things on the network. Smart grid is another avenue along those lines. And I'm frankly excited about the fact that the Internet manages to service this variety of things, whether it's web-based or it's based on native mode, direct access to Internet functionality. I'm actually hope that we are able to retain that breadth of operation because it opens up so many interesting, innovative opportunities. It may be that our future is not strictly web. It may be there are other kinds of platforms that we will want to have available to us in the internet. One thing I would note that as the speeds go up at the edges of the net, whether it's for mobile or for dedicated facilities, that the ability to download a piece of software within the context of a web browser becomes easier and easier, and as storage costs go down, it becomes less and less painful to literally in real time download a piece of software and then run it. So that the dynamics, the ability to adapt, the ability to bring up new applications quickly becomes very attractive. And the sandbox, which Alan mentioned, is utterly critical because you don't want these random applications to have unlicensed access, so to speak, to all of the resources of the platform, only those that are appropriate.
Great, we'll go here and then over here.
Hi, my name is Oliver. I work for Soluciones Orion in Chile. And as you said earlier, Dave, competition is good. And we represent Google and we sell Google Apps throughout all Latin America. And one of the things that we are seeing a lot, at least in Latin America, is the question on clients that are seeing Exchange and seeing Google Apps. And they're questioning us a lot about Google Voice and unified communications. So what about the future? What's coming up on that stage?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to answer because I'm the moderator, but I don't know. Can we break the rules or?
Go for it. I'll fill in.
Look, our goal is actually to be able to unlock all of Google's sort of candy store of capabilities within Google Apps, and we haven't done that yet. And we haven't done that because, frankly, a very pragmatic decision we made a few years ago, which kind of put Google Apps in a different world than the consumer apps. We are working on dissolving that. We want to make sure you have access to every Google service you want to within your business and have choices about which ones make sense for you. So when you think about things like Google Voice and Blogger and the many, many other apps and services that Google has, it is absolutely our goal to make them available to everybody. And you're going to see more and more of that through this year. So that's kind of the short version. We hear you. We hear it constantly. So we're acutely aware that we need to do better on this sooner.
Good answer, Mr. Moderator.
Okay, back to form. Just the moderator now. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Warren from the Department of Justice. I just had a question about the impact of explicitly declared semantics in search going forward. I know that Google's always taken a very implicit semantic approach, partially because you learn so much from what your users are asking and what they're doing and the kind of information that's out there. But either with RDF or with the rise of the cloud, and if you're seeing more structured data being stored in the cloud, does the way that search needs to happen with regards to explicit semantics change in the future?
Well, I have one immediate reaction is that there's, just like there's dark matter and dark energy in the universe, we don't quite understand what it is, there's a huge amount of dark information in the net that you don't see with the normal crawling mechanisms, and finding a way to make those more explicit, more visible, more discoverable without having to send a robot out to ask a million questions of each database in order to generate HTML that you can index is, in my opinion anyway, a very important avenue for exploration. I'd be curious to see what you two guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, our goal is to organize the rules of information and make it universally accessible and useful. There's an awful lot of information out there that is either implicitly or explicitly structured that the more that we can intuit that, understand that, the better results that we can provide. So some of that is around explicitly structured information, things like we do recognize and support microformats and are exposing some of that in the search results and search snippets across some of the different data types that we include in universal search. There is more structure around things like product search, so we recognize product prices and price ranges and brands and things like that. And then we've had other efforts around public data, where we had some announcements over the last quarter where we were taking government provided information and making it much more accessible and visualizable. So those are some examples of recognizing the role of implicit and explicit structure.
Yeah, the difficulty with the explicit structure is getting people to actually do it and then to keep it updated all the time. Yeah. I mean, the beauty of the web and the web pages is you actually see it. So if there's a mistake, you'll actually know about it. And therefore, anything that we can do implicitly is much better. If we can basically extract structure from unstructured web pages, it's much easier for us. We have obviously machine learning and algorithms and other things. But fundamentally, the goal has to be to understand structure. And to the extent where that's not possible, we've done things like Google Base and other things that allow you to load in lots of data. I do think getting more people to load in more data, and actually data that can be tagged, updated all the time, so that you can start composing data in interesting ways on the web, is something that we're definitely interested in, because it will basically enable us to do a lot of things that we could not do anyway. But our basic bias is toward implicit rather than explicit, because it's just so hard to get people to tag everything, you know. And then it's fine to get them to tag it once, but to get them to basically maintain that over long periods of time is quite difficult.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Kevin Kapp with the town of Castle Rock, and we're excited to partner with Google on your fiber to the home network. I'm sure we're the top competitors, so I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that project and how it maybe ties into other things you're talking about today.
Well, I have a little bit that I can add to this. You understand that this project is, at least as I view it, is an experiment to figure out what it takes to actually deliver a gigabit per second to a residential user. We know that in other parts of the world, this has already been done. In Japan, there are a number of places where you can get gigabit service for, whatever, 8,700 yen a month, which made me want to move to Kyoto not too long ago. The real question, though, is what does it actually take technologically? What does it cost? What kinds of technologies and processes are needed in order to not only deliver that kind of capacity, but to maintain it and operate it? So unless Alan tells me differently, I don't believe that our business model is to go and replicate that all over the world so that everybody gets Google-provided gigabit, but rather to understand and be able to articulate what it takes to do that. We get told by many others about the costs and difficulties, and I think this is one way for us to verify, maybe even discover or suggest ways of doing it that might be more effective. So, Ellen, if I misgot that, you might want to respond.
No, I think that's very accurate. If you look back in our history, we did wireless for Mountain View. We were going to do it for San Francisco at one point, but the purpose was not to roll out wireless all over the world. It was to understand the economics of it, understand the issues, and we could actually push forward, you know, some of the ideas that we had into other places, and I think wireless has rolled out, you know, pretty substantially over that period of time. This is a case where, you know, you can't learn about some things on paper. You know, I don't care how great your business analysts are. Maybe you've got better business analysts than we do, but you know, sometimes you have to just build it and then understand what the issues are. I mean, I know there's, and that's the same way that we do in our applications. Sometimes we just ship it and find out what the result is, you know, and to find out, you know, whether this feature or this feature. I remember in news one case, there was a case where we had two features. Both of them were, you know, we argued about back and forth for a very long time about which one was better. The ship date actually made it so neither of them got shipped. But 99 people out of 100 asked for feature A, and none of them, you know, one person asked for feature B. So we knew after we shipped the product basically what consumers really wanted. And I think in this case there's business model issues, there's, you know, trenching issues. I now for the first time know exactly what the cost model looks like for this. I know exactly what segments are the issue in terms of cost. I know about micro-trenching. I know about lots of things that we as a company didn't know about before. And I feel like that's important for us if we're going to interact with that business.
Okay, maybe just one more for me, and if there's one more in the audience after, we can, we're almost done here. But one of the discussion topics that keeps coming back is trust. And in the audience here, a lot of people have a lot of obligations, and there's a governance model, and they have a lot of responsibilities to take care of data, take care of the services to their employees. So what I think is a very fair question to ask, and I'll turn it over to any of you, maybe start with Jeff, is what are the things Google is doing to earn the trust of CIOs and other IT professionals in order to then have a good sense of using Google for mission-critical services?
Sure. Well, I think there's just a baseline of all of the investments, and I touched on some of this earlier, the investments that we're making around reliability of service and security. that are just fundamental. Those are ongoing investments that we're making, and we're continuing to innovate and invest in the infrastructure to make those better and better. And complementing those, we have gone through processes that document exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it. Things like SAS 70 certification, FISMA certifications, so that with standards bodies and models that you recognize, we can confirm what we're doing. We also recently heard about the Department of Integrity having a new certification. We just heard about it. We're pretty sure we're going to get a perfect 6.0 there. But the more fundamental or structural things that we're doing are around, first, just our commitment to openness. We try in all of our systems to adhere to open protocols and have exchange or the ability to export your data. We view your data as your data and not something that we're trying to capture and keep. And part of that is philosophical, of this, just the Google way of doing business, but also pragmatically, it keeps us honest and forces us to continue innovating and providing a great service, because we know that if we ever let you down, there's nothing locking you in. You can leave at any time. So we have a built-in incentive there to continue to innovate and do great things with the product. We've kind of institutionalized that into an effort that we call data liberation. If you do a search for Google data liberation, you can find out a lot more about it. It's an ongoing commitment that we have. The other is around transparency. Per some of the discussion in the CIO panel, no organization is going to be perfect and have 100% reliability, availability of services. We're not going to deliver that. We are going to be very, very good, but when we fall down, we're going to make sure that that information is transparently available, visible to you. You know the status of what we're doing to fix things, and you know the follow-up steps that we're taking to correct things. And that can be seen in the apps status dashboard. If you go to www.google.com/apps-status, you can see the performance history of all of our products since that feature was rolled out a couple of quarters ago.
So let me add one other thing that I can guarantee you is that we're using our own products internally. And I think that's a big win from your point of view. We're betting our own company on our products. And we don't get any special treatment, I guarantee. Just to let you know the history, we used to actually have Gmail as a separate application inside the company. And there was everybody else's Gmail, and there was the company's Gmail. And I still remember the meeting with Larry where we talked about this, and people were basically saying, well, what happens? If we basically use the Gmail that everybody else is using, somebody might see our data. And Larry says, yeah, yeah. We're trying to convince people to use our data. He goes, well, these are companies. And Larry looks at me and says, you mean my personal data is more important than some company data? And the person was just dumbfounded. It's the same data. It's the same thing. Privacy is exactly the same problem. Trust is exactly the same problem. It's the same problem. And so our data, and since that meeting, we combined data centers. There's no special servers. We are treated just like any other application inside of Gmail. And the same thing with our apps. We use them, we dog food them, we try everything out ourselves. I sent a message this morning to Ors on a bug that's driving me crazy, and I'm sure he's listening to me. So I think that's the other thing, is that we're not just selling you something we don't use. We're selling you something that we believe in as a product.
We're living it.
And we're living it every day, and you can guarantee that there's 20,000 advocates right now for the same kind of changes that you're trying to get us to make inside the company.
The last thing I'll say, just in closing, I think advocates is probably the most polite way they've ever described, because Google, 20,000 employees, probably almost half of which are engineers, are amongst the most demanding users of any technology in the world. So I assure you that the conversations, which are usually polite, are very to the point about things our products ought to do better, and we're working very hard at it. So we're miraculously on time. I think Quentin's going to come back up, and we're almost done for the morning. Thank you, gentlemen. It was great to have you here.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Way to go.
All right. Well, just before Jeff Huber told me, there's Jeff, is there that miraculous new app? We're breaking for lunch now. And Google was going to get ready to announce a way to feed everybody watching the webcast as well. Is that panned out? No, it's not ready. Foodle, it was called. Okay, so that's, I'm sorry you guys watching. You'll have to take care of yourselves for lunch. Those of you here in the room, lunch is being served out in the heated tents. These guys really can cook. You want to stay. And there is limited seating as well back behind the curtains. But I encourage you to go out to the heated tents. Also, there's demo stations outside where you can work and play with the stuff we've been talking about.